Karen was alone at home when she was maliciously robbed. The thieves were in and out in moments but took more than £2,000. By the time she realised, both they and her money were long gone. All she can remember was responding to an email from what she thought was her bank, asking her to confirm her security details. That was all the invitation the criminals needed.
You can't see cybercrime, but there are ways to avoid it. At Barclays, we'll never ask you to confirm your security details by email.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on TalkRadio.
Let us say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Morning.
We'll get to your encounter with the e-scooter later. What do you make of Boris and his announcement pending this afternoon? Are you one of those who thinks it might not be quite what we're expecting?
Well, we know it won't be total. For instance, there's been a lot of fuzziness around the edges of the promise that we will no longer be forced to wear masks on our faces. I think there will be places where this will continue to be compulsory. I, for instance, suspect I still won't be able to give blood in England. Because the National Blood Transfusion Service, absurdly, given that everybody who goes to blood clinics is healthy, has the toughest mask restrictions in the country. It doesn't allow for any exemptions. And I think that as far as I can see, the NHS is not going to have the mask decree lifted from it. Yeah. And I have a feeling that there will be strong pressures to retain it in some form on public transport as well. So there'll be that. It doesn't look to me at all as if travelling abroad is particularly easy yet. Many of the rules about going out and doing things will continue, I think, to be irksome and annoying. We're a long way away from it because we have basically surrendered control of our lives to the government, and we now sit around waiting, is the government going to let me do this, that, and the other, rather than how long is it going to be before the government stops doing that? It's the wrong attitude. Interestingly, the very good left liberal elite writer Janice Turner in the Times last week was finally expressing exasperation with mask wearing, which she hasn't up till now. And I do think that some people are beginning to tire of this. And I noticed actually just at the end of last week in shops where I'd previously been the only unmasked person, and I no longer am. And it's a little bit more common on the trains as well, see people not doing it. So there is a semi-liberation, but there is this huge number of people who still long to be kept under control for their own alleged safety. I think it's going to be, let's not be too premature about assuming everything's okay. I think, for instance, weddings and funerals and other things which are taking place in the coming weeks will still be incredibly tightly restricted by comparison with what they ought to be or with what reason would require. And the whole country is still enmeshed in restrictions and indeed in fear. And there are a lot of people working away busily to try and keep that fear going. On the other day on the way home, I went past just outside the centre of Oxford, set up in a park, a little tented camp of people offering free COVID tests on the taxpayer. Why? Why has this appeared in this place? And I went and I said, well, do I have to be ill to be tested? No, anybody can come. It's surge testing. Yeah. If you do that, and I'd have to assume that if it happens on my way home, it happens on a lot of other people's ways home, then the more people you test, the more positive results you're going to get. And so the more easy it is to say to people, this hasn't gone away, it's not over, it'll be back in the winter, we've got to carry on with the restrictions. There is still an enormous lobby which believes this, and it's not powerless.
Well, this is it. I mean, I was rather dismayed but not entirely surprised to see the front page of The Guardian today, in which it says that there's a backlash from scientists as Boris Johnson prepares to lift all COVID restrictions because, of course, Professor Susan Michie, our favourite, is quoted as saying, allowing community transmission to surge is like building new variant factories at a very fast rate. Now, I'm sorry, Professor Susan, she's not a medical professor. What is she doing talking about how variant factories work?
Well, it's all part of the I am a scientist, you will obey attitude we've all developed. Science used to be a defence against ignorance and a defence against panic, because it was all about absolute objective results and testing and experimentation. Now it's about the elevation into a sort of priesthood of people who've got long qualifications after their names. Some of them may well deserve it. but I'm not entirely sure that qualifications in social and experimental psychology give you the position to talk as Professor Mickey does. And maybe you think they do. I very much distinguish between what I call the hard sciences, the ones where actual experiment is still supreme and where things have to be tested to destruction before they're found to be valid, and where anything you say has to be falsifiable, to the modern form, as I say, where somebody has a qualification, we must respect them, whatever they say. I think that just has to be wrong. But science has become a sort of pseudo-religion now, and anybody who says I'm a scientist has to be treated with respect, even if what they say doesn't have a scientific basis. In my view, a scientist has to be listened to absolutely in his or her own discipline, because in that case they have the knowledge and the understanding, they've done the experiments. If they talk generally, it's a different matter altogether, and I think we need to begin to distinguish, but I'm not sure whether we live in a society which is educated enough to make that distinction.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Scientists should be listened to in, as you say, their area of expertise, because in that area they may well be expert, but they're not experts. But they're not experts in everything.
No.
You know, absolute rubbish. And as far as the rollout of the freedoms goes, I'm amazed at how many people are actually against it in the general public. I was looking at a story on Mail Online yesterday, and I always like to look at sort of the comments to get a feel for what the general public are thinking. And an awful lot, I would say at least 50% of the comments were against lifting the lockdown.
Well, as you say, if you spread fear, then you spread a desire for security. If people think that something terrible is coming over the horizon, then they will be happier and happier to be fenced in against it, even if there is no real need for that fence. Yeah. And I'm afraid that's what has been systematically done by very sophisticated and powerful and relentless government propaganda for many, many months. People are afraid. They're still afraid. And once you've made someone afraid, it's very hard indeed to cure them of that fear and say, well, actually, what we've been saying for the past 16 months or so is no longer true. Stop worrying. And it comes from the same mouth as the one which said, be afraid, be very afraid, go home, stay at home, don't go out, don't talk to anybody, don't kiss your granny, wrap yourself up in masks, absolutely cease to have any kind of social life. The same voices which said that, oh, relax, it's all right, nothing to worry about. And it's kind of unconvincing to a lot of people, I think. I'm not surprised by it, I sympathise with them. I was never scared by it in the first place, but a lot of people genuinely were, and this is what was constantly shocking me at the beginning. The number of people, intelligent, educated people, who were genuinely scared by what appeared to me to be crude propaganda, but it still worked.
Absolutely. So, but if, for example, this afternoon at 5 o'clock, Boris does say no more masks, with those few exceptions perhaps that you mentioned, no more social distancing, all bets are off, everything's back to normal, will that not be a day that you said would never have come, though?
No, I don't think so. I think have I said it will never come? I don't. I think it's what I have said. It's very hard to get rid of these things. I think we're going to live, particularly with travel restrictions, and I think there's going to be big problems in schools and places of work for the foreseeable future. I think because these things having been established is very, very hard to get rid of. Just as the ridiculous queues to have your testicles scanned and your and anything liquid on your in your luggage thrown away, which came after September the 11th and that court case, have never ever been relaxed and never will. Just as the huge fortified gates at the end of Downing Street, which is supposed to protect Downing Street from an attack by Hezbollah, I think, in a truck bomb, will never go. People will never have the courage to say we're going to get rid of these things. And the long-term effect on workplaces, and indeed the long-term effect on the economy, which is just about to begin to be felt in a big way, though the inflation, which I've long predicted, has started, that's also going to be there whatever we do. So I don't know, I suppose it's possible. It may all become completely irrelevant because of some new unforeseen crisis that we have yet to experience. I don't know. But at the moment, I suspect that life is going to be stuck in this restricted, form-filling, quarantining, generally scared state for a very long time to come. And you'll really feel it if ever you try and travel any distance from your home.
Yeah, and I've certainly spoken to a lot of people who have said, well, you know, the thing is, it's not a bad idea to wash your hands every time you go anywhere in public, and it's not a bad idea not to touch things because, you know, I'm just going to hold that with a cloth of some kind. And you're right. I mean, that will be probably the way of things for the rest of time now.
Well, that was all ritualistic, wasn't it? I was amused in public lavatories. Now, I wash my hands, and then I am very, very careful. I either use a piece of kitchen towel, something which I keep with me, not to touch the door on the way out, because that completely undoes all the hand washing work you've done. And, I see people fanatically washing their hands for 2 minutes, or I'm supposed to do, and then immediately they go and they touch the door.
Yeah, it's
a ritual that they've adopted. It's not an actual rational precaution. If you're rational, it's the door is more dangerous than anything else in the public country. But it's a ritual which has been adopted to comfort people rather than a real precaution. And also, in terms of the lives of children, it's essential for them to have some experience with dirt and everything else to build up immunity. So we may have overdone that too. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that we're being governed by rational people.
No.
And it doesn't seem to me that we're being governed by particularly strong-minded or courageous people either. And I think also fear is the most powerful of all emotions.
Yeah.
And,
well, there's also a bit of a whiff of Caligula's Rome about the cabinet, it seems to me. First we had Matt Hancock, now we've got Michael Gove, all sorts of lurid allegations being made, which we won't go into here. But it does seem as though they've been having quite a nice time, thank you very much indeed, while we've all been being careful not to go anywhere.
I think Caligula gets very bad press. I think a horse would be a great deal superior to a lot of people in the current cabinet.
Yes, I think that's probably true. But they do seem to have this kind of air of complete and utter arrogance, And I know it's a well-worn phrase, do as I say, not do as I do. But it does seem a bit like that, doesn't it?
Well, you can't avoid it. Once you introduce this kind of thing, then it's impossible for anybody to abide by it, just as it was impossible for the old Soviet elite to abide by the supposed egalitarianism, which they were imposing on everybody else. So they had special waiting rooms at railway stations, special departure lounges in airports, special carriages on the trains, special places to live, special hospitals, and special shops to go to. But they got away with it because they could keep it all secret. In this country, we still have enough of a free press for this to be very difficult. And as long as this kind of thing goes on, there will be more people exposed for not keeping rules which are impossible to keep anyway, and which nobody actually of any intelligence can seriously believe in any case.
No, I mean, that's why, even though it is incredibly hypocritical, I'm not one of those who actually attacks them for doing it. I'm just attacking them for telling us not to do it.
Exactly, yeah. That is their fault. It's in trying to impose on us things that they don't themselves believe, and in not believing they're in propaganda, and in behaving as if they don't believe it. And that is, I'm afraid, really disqualifies them from governments. One of the many reasons why governments should leave people alone as much as possible, because otherwise they're inevitably in the middle of a jungle of hypocrisy.
Yes, absolutely right. Stay with us, Peter, if you will. We'll come back to you. I wanted to ask you about the NHS, which has also become something which will never be the same again. The Queen has awarded it, apparently, the George Cross, for heaven's sake. This is talk
in the world. But the truth is, we have an epidemic of scams, and it is not policed. You will have been told to report it to Action Fraud. If I were here in my money-saving expert role, I would be telling you to report it to Action Fraud. In this role, which is slightly more political, I will be honest, Action Fraud is mostly pointless. They will not investigate if you report it to them. I bet they said we don't have resources and we don't have enough way to deal with it.
Not lines of to investigate, because the corporate headquarters were in Switzerland, which is utterly rubbish, if I may say that, because they had an address in London. They had telephone numbers in London. Mobile numbers.
We have no app.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on TalkRadio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on TalkRadio. Peter Hitchens is with us, Mail on Sunday columnist, of course. Peter, I wanted to ask you about what you made of the announcement this morning in the Times that the Queen has awarded the George Cross to the NHS, which is now fast becoming the new religion in this country.
Well, I was struck by the only parallel that I know of, which is my birthplace, the island of Malta, which has collectively awarded the George Cross. After undergoing the most terrifying and relentless bombing by Mussolini and Hitler for a very long period of time. If you want to know what it was like, there's a novel by Nicholas Montserrat called The Capellan of Malta, in which it is described in detail. It's frightful. And the behaviour of the Maltese, whose quarrel it really wasn't, under fire, was extraordinary. and rather noble, and I completely approve of that. I'm not sure whether this is very comparable. Obviously, one admires people who particularly go to the great lengths of being trained as doctors, particularly those who perform surgery. It takes a huge amount of courage to do that sort of thing, an enormous amount of hard work and self-sacrifice and training before you begin to make a living out of it. And you have to give something to that. And the same for nurses. I had an aunt, my auntie, who was a nurse all her life in the old Nightingale tradition, and was one of the most admirable people I've ever met. And the sort of work that she did was extraordinary. But I'm not sure the NHS itself is not the same thing as the people in it, all of whom obviously deserve the sort of respect which I've just expressed. The NHS is a particular idea of how to provide a free at the point of use medical service to a big country. It's not necessarily the best way of doing it, nor is it in many ways perfect. In fact, a friend of mine has recently undergone a most distressing series of how shall I say, knockbacks, which have led to her suffering quite a great deal from the NHS. And although many people can recount good experiences of it, I think you'll probably find that a lot of people can also recount bad experiences of it. I think we should separate admiration for the dedication of medical staff from admiration for the organisation itself. I don't want to be grudging to people, but I feel slightly odd about it, especially given the only comparison I can think of, which is a rather different sort of thing.
Well, it's true, isn't it?
The politics of the NHS is extraordinary. The French also have a health service. I think Anne-Elisabeth Moutet wrote very interestingly about a year ago, saying that the French don't just, they're happy to have it, they're glad to pay for it. In many ways, they consider it to be superior to ours, particularly because no one ever is put in a ward in a French hospital anymore. Everybody always goes in individual rooms, something we've yet to achieve. But they simply can't imagine how anybody could worship it the way that we do. And I think the French attitude may well be quite sensible.
Well, they also have a far better system with their GPs, where the GP is only paid per consultation as opposed to having a number of patients, which is how they do it here. If you've got 100 patients, you get paid 100 times whatever the stipend is, whereas in France, you only get paid if you see 100 patients, which I think is a far better way to do it.
There are many models for public health services, from Canada to France to Germany to Spain to wherever it is, and they're all different, and we can learn a lot from all of them. But I think that the less you admire, the less you learn. The less you admire, the more you learn. The more you admire, the less you learn. And I think it's holding your breath with admiration for the National Health Service is not going to get it improved to the point where it will be the true equivalent of the health services of the most advanced countries in the world, which in many cases I just don't think it is. And so that has absolutely, before anybody even accuses me of it, I'm not in any way in this suggesting that the people who work in it are themselves incompetent or bad, because I'm not. The reverse of it. Many of them use their competence and skills despite the organisation, which in many cases gets in the way of what they would otherwise do.
Well, that's right. And the health and care bill is going to be pushed through by Sajid Javid, I think, in the next few days, and that will no doubt kick up all of the old arguments about the Tories trying to kill it off, sell it off, ruin it. Meanwhile, while giving more and more money to it.
Well, yeah, I sympathise with some of this. I think that during the Thatcher period, the marketisation of the health service and the reorganisations which have followed again and again did not do much good. And I think the suspicion of some people that an attempt to semi-privatise it is underway, not wholly unjustified by facts. So I really would wish this was not a party political issue. I think the case has been put forward by more intelligent politicians and MPs that it should in some way become a non-political issue in which both parties combine to form a way of governing it, which was taken outside the Labour, Tory, or any other argument. And I think that would be a good thing, because if our concern is primarily for the health of the country rather than for which party takes credit for the NHS, which seems to be what the parties think, we would have a better health service.
Yeah. I think so. We're right out of time, but look, just quickly, Peter, let me ask you about your encounter with the e-scooter, only because it's something we've talked about a lot.
Well, it happens to me. I've been writing about this, and then there I was on the pavement in Kensington High Street, and there was this geezer on an e-scooter coming towards me quite fast, and I thought, here it is, and this is what's going to happen to everybody if we legalise these stupid things. And we've got a limited amount of time. WriteToThem.com will tell you how to reach your MP. If it's in your local area, your council will have a consultation where you can object to it. But object to it, because this is the last chance you get. If you don't object now, they will be legalised, and it will be much, much worse. I saw another child was injured by one, I think, yesterday. And that's particularly serious. Children, old people, the blind and partially sighted and the deaf, are terribly vulnerable, and they will be a disaster if we legalise it.
No.
You can't stop it.
I think you're absolutely right. Peter, great to talk to you, as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist, a man that fights against the e-scooter, as I do. In fact, there's a petition out there that you can sign in Parliament. Check my Twitter out, check my Facebook page out. You'll find it. Go and sign it. And as he says, go and object to some of these plans to roll out more e-scooters and more rental availability for people to ride around, apparently without any care for anybody else on the streets of our cities and our towns. And not just the streets, the pavements as well. Let's get